The longer I played this game, the longer this video grew in my head, and I had no idea how I was going to compile hundreds of hours of gameplay into a cohesive 10-minute video where all my points made sense and connected by the end of it, like the rest of my videos. And I still haven't figured out how to do that, so I'm not going to. I think Elden Ring deserves more. It deserves to override my 10-minute maximum video rule, because this is one of the best games I've ever played, and it's special to me. It felt like more than just a game, this was an entire experience, even before I actually played the game. So here's how my journey went as I conquered the lands between to become Elden Lord. This is not my first time trying a From Software game. When I was younger, I tried Dark Souls, but I frustratingly returned it to the store because I made the unfortunate mistake of thinking it was just a normal hack and slash open world game, but just within a fancy setting. If you're familiar with From Software games, you can guess how well that went. Skip forward a few years and I would get to try Bloodborne. Unbeknownst to me, that the game that I would be playing would be made by the same studio that made Dark Souls. But me being a bit older at the time and being better at games, I lasted a month and a half this time before uninstalling. I actually beat 2 bosses, but I've never played RPGs prior to this, so I ignored the entire shop and failed to understand the game's mechanics and how upgrading my weapons and how the stats would benefit me. Which, now looking back, made it hard to fight enemies as I progressed because my weapons were probably weak and underleveled. But the main reason I uninstalled is because Bloodborne doesn't have a map, so it became increasingly difficult for me, particularly because I'm a lost cause when it comes to navigation, both in games and real life. I kept getting lost in the Forbidden Woods. Bloodborne does not give you any help with directions and telling you if you're progressing in the right direction, and every time you die, you go back to the last lamp you lit, which led to me eventually putting the game down because I could never figure out where I was going, in addition to my underlevel weapons. But even though I only played for that short time and got a vertical slice of Bloodborne, it remains etched in my brain. I still reference it to this day, from the unique art direction and its horrific setting of Yharnam, which is a depiction of Victorian London, its eldest enemies, and its unique weapons. The Cane Whip is still one of the coolest weapons I've seen in a game. I've been playing games all of my life, but that was the first time I played a game that didn't hold my hand from the beginning. You press start and the game just kicks you into the deep end of a 12-foot pool and you either sink or swim. February 25th, 2022, I would wake up to my Twitter timeline in complete chaos. I was seeing the same sentence over and over in almost every tweet. Elden Ring is out now. However, today was different. You couldn't escape it. Elden Ring seized the gaming community overnight and consumed every gaming discussion for the entirety of 2022. Everything evolved around this game. You couldn't go on any social media site, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, and not see it. The last time I remember seeing the game being talked about this much for months on end was when GTA 5 released in 2013. With me being older now, more open-minded and knowledgeable on games and the gaming industry, this time I knew Elden Ring was from the Bloodborne developers. Remembering how my time went with that game, even though I enjoyed it briefly, I knew I was never gonna play Elden Ring. I knew it would just be as difficult, if not more, and probably follow the same gameplay style. Since the game was everywhere I turned, eventually I started watching the clips that appeared on my TikTok and Twitter feeds. I wasn't going to play it, but I started living vicariously through other people. I enjoyed watching them and their reactions, from their funny deaths to their heartbreaking defeats when victory slipped out of their hands at the last second during boss fights, and then their eventual triumphs. I was just on the sidelines cheering them on. Because I was watching random clips from so many different people, I managed to avoid spoilers for 10 months, as I wasn't watching one person go through the entire game, so I had no idea where anyone was. Eventually, the thoughts started creeping in. I kept saying to myself, I'll never play this game, but if I did, I'd be a wizard casting all the lightning spells. From watching the clips online, that style of gameplay was the total opposite from just using blades and melee-based weapons like in Bloodborne. Fast forward to December, and Elden Ring would go on to win Game of the Year. That same night, I went on Steam to play Destiny, and the first thing that popped up was a Steam ad, Elden Ring 20% off, play it now. So I decided to take the plunge and bought the game. I loaded up Elden Ring and set an alarm on my phone for an hour and 10 minutes so I don't miss Steam's refund window. I went into the character creator looking for the astrologer because I knew that was the wizard class and I've been mentally planning for this. And that's when I saw it. I watched people play this game for months and had no idea there was a samurai class. If you're new to my channel and don't follow me on Twitter, I absolutely love samurai. And just like that, all of my mental planning for months went out the window in 0.2 seconds the moment I saw the samurai class, because there was no way I wasn't gonna pick it. My entire introduction to Elden Ring was basically that clip of Sideshow Bob from The Simpsons walking into a bunch of rakes, one after the other. After doing the tutorial, I made it to Limgrave, and there he was, my first nemesis. A guy on a huge horse. Apparently, everybody knew to not attack this guy, but I guess that says something about me because I immediately ran up and swung on him. And that went about as well as you'd expect. After 20 minutes of hitting for 10 damage and getting one hit killed, I figured maybe I'll come back to this later. In my defense, I knew Elden Ring was supposed to be hard, so getting one hit killed while doing almost no damage, I thought was, normal. I thought this was supposed to happen. From the first site of Grace, I adventured over to the right, and that's when I saw some enemies camping out on a bit of land, so I decided to investigate. And this would be the first of many bait and switches. The cocktail of fear, confusion, and anxiety I was served when a 100-foot fire-breathing dragon spawned out of nowhere and descended right on those guys had me fumbling over myself to escape and get to safety. And when a health bar appeared on my screen and the music started to swell, it added even more confusion because surely they didn't expect me to fight this. I did not sign up for that. I ran all the way around the lake trying not to trigger that dragon fight because I just wanted to see what was on the other side. And a giant crab popped out of the ground and chased me into the opening of the side of a mountain, which had an elevator, so this is kind of how I discovered my first mineshaft. And after dying to some rats, I found an underground cellar just to open a chest, and my reward was that I got kidnapped, and ended up in a place where the sky was blood red. Caelid did not sound like the type of place you had fun, and after wandering around for 10 minutes, my assessment was correct. By this time it was 4 AM and I checked my phone, and during that time my alarm went off 5 times and I didn't hear it. I missed the refund window. I was so into Elden Ring I didn't take my eyes off my monitor for 4 hours. I went to bed thinking about it. I woke up and it was the first thing on my mind. Throughout the day I was just thinking about playing the game and I couldn't wait to stop doing work so I could hop back in. The last time I had such strong first impressions from the beginning of a game was Prey. I won't spoil it, but go play it. It's a very underrated game. As I was watching the opening cutscene, I had this feeling of nervousness with a hint of excitement that I couldn't explain why at the time, but looking back now, I was nervous to try the game because I didn't want to not like it. I think I secretly wanted to play the game for months, but was afraid I wouldn't like it. Having to watch people have so much fun with this game, but knowing I could never get that same level of enjoyment as them if I didn't like the game was my concern. It happened with God of War 2018, Red Dead Redemption 2, and many other popular games everybody loves, but I just don't. I think I subconsciously decided to just not try the game to avoid that and continue watching other people having fun. Now that I know I liked the game, I didn't want a repeat of Bloodborne, but I also didn't want anything spoiled for me. I wanted to go in as blind as possible, so I came up with a list of rules. I'm only allowed to Google which stats are best for my class, tips for upgrading weapons, how to get consumables, but no co-op, no looking at guides, farming areas, or anything like that. As I would continue playing, this list would grow as I discovered the requests you could do for NPCs, but it wasn't always clear what they wanted you to do or where to go, so sometimes I'd look up where to find them. I thought I was really late to the game, but as I was posting my Elden Ring clips on Twitter, 2 other people, we follow each other, and every now and then they'd comment, "Oh, I'm right behind you," or "I just passed this area," and we'd talk about it for a bit. Now, because I wasn't doing co-op, I turned off matchmaking, and this turned off all of the in-game notes and phantom. But I had someone on Twitter who beat the game and played the Dark Souls series, so they'd comment under my posts sometimes like, "Oh, you like katanas, look out for this weapon," or in this area, I'm looking forward to see how you handle it, that type of thing. So even though I had notes turned off in game, I kind of had somebody leaving notes for me in real life, so shout out to Jay, thanks for the tips. Also, I'd be making notes in my notes app since Elden Ring doesn't have any type of quest log. So I have an entire list of notes about where to find NPCs to continue quests, from clues they left or instructions. and keeping track of bosses I fought and lost so I could return to them later. I only discovered I didn't have to do this after 90 hours in game, when I actually hit square and placed a marker by accident. But taking notes added to my experience because, again, it's something I saw people doing a lot growing up while playing RPG games. So even though I found the marker feature late, if I could go back and change it, I wouldn't. Open world games are my second favorite type of games. I've played so many of them over the years that I'm accustomed to the open world formula by now. Even though a game is new, I already know what to expect from it. The only thing that will be new to me are the story and the gameplay mechanics. Elden Ring doesn't use this formula or follow the open world rules, and it felt like a totally new experience to me. I think that's why I got as hooked as fast as I did, because I couldn't predict anything that was going to happen next in this game, since it didn't follow the rules. In open world games, the map layout and difficulty are normally tied together. They start you off at the bottom of the map in an easy area, and the further you progress and discover or unlock more of the map, the harder the game gets, whether it's enemy difficulty or gameplay mechanics. The difficulty is normally in relation to where you are on the map. The way Elden Ring handles this aspect of the game is unlike any game I've ever played. It takes a more staggered approach to difficulty as opposed to how most games just take a more linear approach. Like, this area's level 1, it's easy, this area's level 2, it's a little bit harder, and so on. The best way I can explain this point is, I guess, by using a heat map. Instead of increasingly getting more difficult in a linear fashion, Elden Ring has pockets of difficulty all over the map. Limgrave is the easiest area in the game because it's made up of mostly soldier and humanoid enemies, but as a first time player, as you progress, you will come across these areas where it feels like the difficulty just spikes and you'll struggle to fight these enemies and you can't progress any further. The entire area isn't hard, you just hit a pocket where the difficulty changed. The lower part of Lernia of the Lakes is where I first really noticed this, going from fighting wolves and soldiers that attack 1 to 2 times before stopping, to them introducing the Revenants that teleport, poison you, send projectiles, and have 10-hit combos. That was not the switch up I was expecting, and I was stuck there for a while till I just said screw it and ran as fast as I could through the area, avoiding being hit, and then I came across this thing. Which leads to my second point. A lot of games want you to progress through one area at a time so they can steadily increase the difficulty and introduce you to new enemy types. In Red Dead Redemption, going from the McFarlane's farm to do the mission for the sheriff in Armadillo is how they take you from doing horse riding missions and getting you accustomed to the basics of the game, to now riding with the sheriff going after a gang in a canyon, introducing you to enemies with bolt action rifles and snipers that will punish you for being out in the open and not using cover like how they taught you to. And then finally releasing you into the open world to do as you like at the end of that mission. That mission serves as a bridge holding your hand between the tutorial section and now getting you accustomed to new weapons, enemies, and the type of action in the game. It's done well and had excellent pacing, whereas Elden Ring just does this. They'll kidnap you and drop you in a completely new area that you are clearly underleveled and not ready for, because the enemies will kill you in one hit. But again, pockets of difficulty. They purposely drop you in an area that you can't handle, but just like at the beginning of the game where there are areas of difficulty that were harder, it tends to be the opposite for the upper part of the map that's difficult. There are pockets where it's easier than the surrounding areas because of the enemy types. You go from fighting soldiers to them introducing a dragon as a difficulty spike. And then there's an area that's filled with dragons and Caelid, and they introduce a fortress that's filled with soldier enemies to decrease the difficulty a bit. And I think that that's genius, using enemy types to create pockets of varying difficulty spikes all over the map. It also serves a third purpose, which is keeping the player on their toes. A lot of games introduce new enemy types that you learn to fight, and then once you go to a new area, that's it, you never see them again. But with this, you can't afford to forget an enemy's moveset because they will be brought back repeatedly and you'll never know when. As I started playing, I actually forgot I was concerned about navigation and being able to tell where I'd have to go, like in previous games. The biggest change, apart from actually giving players a map, is the amount of sites of grace scattered everywhere. In Bloodborne, the respawn lamps were so far away from each other, I was trying not to die. The result of that made me not want to explore, but with the number of respawn points so close to each other now, changed how I played. I didn't have to be afraid of dying because I'll respawn nearby. They also subtly tell you where to go, as the sites of grace on the main path that follow the story will have a grace extending and pointing in a direction. So you can go off exploring, and when you're ready to return to the main quest, you can go back to a spawn point with an arrow and continue your journey. The addition of all of these spawn points but not adding any icons on the map, unlike every other open world game, promotes exploring, and I'm so glad they did this because the devs went insane with the designing of every single area on this map. It's not a mystery as to how they won best art direction. Every area has its own color palette and story, which makes it visually distinct and unforgettable. You can't mix up two different areas on this map. Elden Ring's presentation of new areas is incredible. They made sure every time you saw a new area for the first time, it's a jaw-dropping view and makes you want to explore to see what's inside. Snow areas are my favorite environment in games because they're the one area that's different from the rest of the game, and I always look forward to finding that area. When I finally arrived at the mountaintops of the giants though, the only thing I felt was disappointment, which was unexpected as this is always the highlight for me, but it was disappointing not because the area was bad, but because I've seen so many mind-blowing views and otherworldly environments prior to arriving at the mountaintops that by comparison, the snow area that is normally the highlight for me just seemed plain and underwhelming. After I've seen a comet hit the surface, causing chunks of land to ignore the laws of gravity to then reveal an underground city with a sky that looks like this, it's no wonder the only thing I felt was disappointment when I finally saw snow. If you told me that this was a level from Doom Eternal, I would believe you. I absolutely love the architecture of this game. From castles like Stormvale, Morn, Sol, and the Shaded Castle, to the Royal Lucaria Academy. When I walked up the stairs to see the view of the academy, the first thing that came to my mind was Hogwarts, take notes, because this is what a school where you can learn magic would look like. Every structure in this game looks like it was designed by the Romans. The reason I have so much hours in this game is because most of it was spent exploring and taking screenshots. I can lay out a collage of photos and you could follow my journey from the start to the end of the game. I've never explored a map so much because normally I just do the main quest and finish the game. Exploring is not something I like to do. Cyberpunk's Night City is my favorite open world map in terms of visuals. It is extremely immersive. They capture the feel of what it would be like to live in and experience a futuristic city. Anthem's map is my favorite in terms of scale and sense of freedom. The verticality is unmatched, from the depths of the underwater caverns to free falling off of cliffs. Elden Ring's map is a combination of both. No matter how far away, how high, or how low a place may seem, if you can see it, you can go there. You just have to figure out how to get there. When I discovered this, the entire game changed for me. These weren't just assets out in the open to make the game look good. If you can see a structure, you could go there. Any place I thought was interesting, I immediately had to figure out how to get there. But no area will get more praise from me than Volcano Manor. This is hands down my favorite location in the entire game. I think this is the best looking point of interest on the map. You could fast track and take an elevator, or you could take the more scenic route that I took. The journey you have to take trekking up the side of a mountain higher than a cloud layer until you eventually finding the manor. The exterior design of the building to the decor and the interior. When you first arrive and see the manor, it's an enormous structure. It looks old and kind of depressing, but when you enter inside, it's a total 180. It's clear whoever built this manor not only has unlimited amounts of money, but also a PhD in interior design. The mix of browns and golds on the furniture, light fixtures, and chandeliers, with red accents on the curtains, carpets, and candles blends together amazingly. Those colors really pop against the white background limestone walls and structures like the support beams, staircases, and the roof, which all have designs engraved in them. And it all comes together with the red tint from the glow of the surrounding candles. I'm a graphic designer and I could never come up with a color palette that works this well. That's why I'm so impressed by this place. But especially the lava. They didn't go, let's make a house on top of a volcano. The lava is integrated into the level. It's a part of the manor. The bridge falls in and out of it. There's a lava fall dead and center flowing into the destroyed town below and around the back of the manor. Against the muted color of the buildings, the lava and cinders flying around illuminate the area, and the smoke is so thick it clouds the sky above and blocks out the sun, giving it this depressing look as if there's no hope, which is fitting compared to the appearance of the interior of the manor. It tells two different stories of how the inhabitants of the manor live versus what's happening to the people outside of it. To top it off, one of two of the most over-the-top boss fights takes place here. It's not a regular boss room, it's an entire arena with huge chandeliers and stacks of bones from the people Rykard has killed. The fight itself is extremely stressful and overwhelming. There's no room for error. It's also a visual clusterfuck of projectiles in phase 2 as the roof disappears, and Rykard is making it rain and going all out. It's clear whoever designed this fight was going through something in life, but it is still my favorite boss fight. I haven't talked about my gameplay yet, but I was progressing relatively well through the game and defeating bosses. It took me 3 days to beat Margate and even longer to beat the Tree Sentinel. I didn't beat him until 2 months in. I had a very rough start because I was fully dedicated to being a samurai. The first thing I did when I discovered you could dual wield weapons was I got a second katana. I was gonna live and die by my blades, so dodging and timing enemy attacks was something I needed to get good at, because I wasn't going to be using a shield. Honestly, I just wanted them because I thought they looked cool and fit the samurai aesthetic. But by dual wielding 2 katanas, I accidentally created a bleed build without realizing. I also ended up playing the game like it was Bloodborne because I used a spear to interrupt enemy attacks the same way you'd use the guns. Again, I was fully into the samurai role, so this was melee only. I didn't have any points in arcane, intellect, or mind yet, so spells, incantations, and most weapon skills were not an option. But by playing like this, it quickly taught me my strengths and weaknesses. Long-range attacks and shielded enemies were my kryptonite. The Raya Lucaria Academy and the capital were the most frustrating regions for me, which is why completing catacombs and tunnels became my favorite side activities. Catacombs were puzzles, and you had to find a way to reach a switch to unlock the doors at an entrance, and in tunnels it was fun platforming and trying to get to the bottom without dying. Both activities had guaranteed bosses at the end, which I look forward to. In a game where I couldn't predict anything, these 2 dungeon types gave me some sense of predictability. I knew what to expect, and I liked fighting the bosses at the end because it was good practice for my dodging. It got to a point where I wasn't fighting bosses. I'd go into fights with the sole intention of just learning their attack patterns and dodging them. I wouldn't attack. I'd do this for 20-30 minutes till I thought I got all of their attacks memorized, wipe, and then go and beat the boss. My confidence was growing at an insane rate. I went from fearing anything slightly bigger than me to running headfirst towards the biggest enemies I saw because I loved the challenge. The learning curve to dodging was steep. I was under the assumption that as long as I dodged, I couldn't be hit. But finally realizing dodging towards an enemy instead of always rolling back or to the side was when I really felt like my dodging leveled up. In a game where you die so quickly, your default instinct is to stay back to avoid being hit. And I'm sure the game knows this, as the key to beating a lot of enemies is to actually be close to them and roll towards an attack to dodge it. The game wants you to confront this thing you're afraid of. The only way to beat giant enemy types was for me to get up close and personal. I had no long-range attacks, and when I finally got comfortable constantly being in the danger zone is when the game changed for me. It was getting to a point where I was beating enemies I encountered for the first time without having to learn their attack patterns because my dodge timing was getting so good. Sometimes it felt like I was on autopilot and muscle memory just took over because I don't know how I knew when to dodge, I was just doing it. I remember the first time it happened, I was fighting the worm under Stormvale Castle, an enemy so big I couldn't tell when it was attacking because the camera was locked onto it in such a small area, and yet I was dodging most of the attacks. But just like Icarus, I flew just a little bit too close to the sun because my ever-growing confidence would grind to a halt when I reached the late game. Because Elden Ring is a game that demands respect, and it would quickly remind me of that while humbling me for a week straight. Commander Niall at Castle Sol and the Godskin duo in the Crumbling Azula sent me to bed frustrated every single night. I respect my character 3 times, but going back and forth between these two bosses from 11 PM to 4 AM and taking nothing but losses does something to a person mentally. I had hit a wall and I couldn't progress, and eventually it broke me. Up until that point, I was still using the same 3 weapons and the jellyfish summon, and the samurai outfit, which if you don't know, has terrible stats, and does very little damage negation. I was basically a glass cannon. And on the last day of the week, I lost hope, and those lists of rules came crumbling down. I was googling every way to cheese these bosses, the best farming areas so I could level up my health, what status effects they were weak to, everything. I did end up beating them after cheesing Nell and putting the Godskin duo to sleep with sleep pots. It wouldn't be too long till I got stuck again at the Draconic Tree Sentinel guarding the final boss fight for the Crumbling Azula. The Tree Sentinel was my nemesis, and this was a harder version. As I was already defeated and broke my rules, I figured, why stop now? I tried doing co-op, but I used the wrong finger and allowed someone else to summon me to their world instead. The 3 of us beat the Sentinel and went on to start fighting the Blade of Death. And as we were fighting, it made me smile, watching 3 different playstyles fight the same enemy. The host was using magic and raining down spells. The other player was using a colossal sword and was just doing massive damage to the boss and tanking every hit. And I was waiting for my window to get in, attack, and get out. The host died and I got sent back to my world and summoned more players to help me beat my Sentinel while another player invaded. I purposely got killed so I could fight the boss by myself, but when I was in co-op, I realized in that moment I didn't have to feel like I failed because I broke my rules. Yeah, I used methods to help me beat the bosses faster, but it didn't necessarily make them any easier. I still had to dodge attacks and complete the fights. And getting help from co-op didn't mean that I wasn't skilled enough because a lot of times the host or other players I summoned died before me. I had to try multiple times before I got paired with players good enough to help me defeat the Draconic Tree Sentinel. But if anything, it made me realize co-op was actually more fun. And using different consumables like greases and different summons made me realize just how many different ways there are to play this game. By me not researching anything because I didn't want to get spoiled, I also closed off myself to more knowledge on the game. So being humbled for a week straight led to a big revelation, and it was a learning experience because the latter part of the game would play out very differently. I was googling whatever consumable I got, what it was good for, and how to craft different types of arrows. Since the beginning of the game, the Malenia boss fight was what I was looking forward to. I've seen people raging and spent hours trying to beat her. I was curious how my fight with her would go. If I'm being honest, this was probably the main reason I wanted to get the game. And after 100 hours, I finally found her, and this was the moment I was waiting for since the start, and this is how that fight went. I could have beat Malenia the first time fighting her, and I threw the fight in the second phase because there was no way that this is how this was going to go. I waited 100 hours for this. Something must have been wrong, so I went to Google to see if she got nerfed, and it turns out the bleed build that I actually made at the start of the game by wanting 2 katanas and just decided to continue going with it because it fit the samurai theme. Yeah, she is weak to that. Malenia is weak to bleed effects. I tried to change armor, weapons, and not use any summons to put myself at more of a disadvantage, but since I only upgraded my 3 katanas the entire game, using any other weapon just made the fight go from doable to impossible. So I just got practice dodging her attacks for a while before I accepted the disappointment and decided to beat her and move on. Approaching the end of the game, I decided I wanted to finish the game how I started it, in my samurai outfit, which meant I was back to being a glass cannon and couldn't take much damage. After defeating the very next boss on the first try, that's when I realized the Mimic Tear had to go. It was making me enjoy boss fights a bit less. I used the jellyfish to take aggro so I could heal, but the Mimic did this and dished out the same amount of damage as me. So, for what I thought was the final boss fight, I fought the Radagon without it. I was back to struggling and learning attack patterns till I was victorious, and that was the feeling that was missing from the last 2 major boss fights where the Mimic was present. The Elden Beast final boss, though, was a long-range, frustrating magic fight, just like Renala, and this was my weakness, so I immediately went back and called the Mimic and used it as a distraction when I realized you had to beat those 2 bosses back to back without dying. But knowing that I beat the Radagon by myself without it was good enough for me. It took me 3 days to beat the Elden Beast, but when I completed the game, I just sat there in silence, watching the credits roll, basking in my accomplishment. After failing and uninstalling years ago, I finally completed a From Software game. It's no surprise that Elden Ring is the studio's best-selling game. From 2011, creating the Dark Souls franchise, to Bloodborne and Sekiro, steadily improving and showing the lessons learned of what works and what doesn't, with the making of every new game has paid off. And this is the result, their magnum opus. This is one of the very few games I would give a 10 out of 10 to, and I've played a lot of games, but this is a masterpiece. Even though I picked up the game 10 months late, I think I chose the perfect time to play Elden Ring. Just like how From Software improved over every game until they made their best entry, in terms of my gaming life, I weirdly feel like I've been on a similar journey. Since trying Dark Souls, there have been certain games I've played over the years that have taught me lessons that have prepared me to beat a game like this. Lessons that my younger self didn't learn yet, so it's no surprise to me now I didn't complete previous From Software titles. These specific games have molded me into the type of player, and even to some degree, the type of person I am today. Rainbow Six Siege, the first game I've played that had permadeath and no respawning, unlike Battlefield and Call of Duty, which I was accustomed to. That game taught me that every death is a lesson. Learn from it so you don't die that exact same way again. 5 years of watching myself make mistakes from the enemy's point of view in kill cams, and taking mental notes every time. Drive Club, my favorite racing game of all time. This is where my love of a challenge and hunger for competition comes from. There's nothing I love more than beating other people's lap times or scores on a leaderboard, and that comes from this game. Different clubs would set fastest laps and send me challenge invites to try to beat their times. Every day I got home from college, there would be 10 to 20 challenge invites flooding my notifications. Second place just wasn't good enough for me. I'd spend hours going around the same track and taking mental notes of my mistakes like I learned to do from Siege, and perfecting every corner until I passed my opponent's ghost and beat their time on the leaderboard. The Division 2 was my entry into RPG games and understanding the mechanics, how they work, status effects, and how to create builds. I've never understood how people could enjoy grinding and doing the same missions till they got certain weapons, but after playing this, I understood the appeal of RPG games. Apex Legends is where my resilience really got toughened. It taught me to know when you can't win and it's time to call it quits. Take a step back, come up with a different strategy, and try again. Going against teams with different abilities and knowing when you were at a disadvantage and it's time to leave and rotate before you died was a must. It took me a very long time to get good at this game. Since Apex is so punishing and strategizing against 19 other teams to win isn't easy, you lose. A lot. To be able to take so many losses back to back and just shrug them off without letting it mentally get to you is a useful skill. Playing Apex definitely built up my mental fortitude, constantly losing, and instead of wanting to quit, using those losses as motivation to want to get better till I was good enough to win. And lastly, Destiny 2, which I'm still playing, is a more complex RPG than The Division 2, specifically in making builds and gameplay. You have to stick to your role and know what your build can do. Try to do things outside of that and it won't end well. All of the lessons I learned from these games over the years prepared me to play Elden Ring, and it's why I actually finished the game. If you didn't realize, all of those lessons those games taught me were all to do with mentality and not mechanical skill. I don't think mechanical skill plays a huge role in Elden Ring as much as mentality. How many times can you be beaten and choose to get back up and fight determines if you will finish this game or not. As a first time player, I get it now. The appeal of this game isn't necessarily how good you are or your build, but the overwhelming sense of accomplishment you feel every time you beat a boss or an enemy that was just constantly beating you. Despite losing, you just kept going back until you won. In an interview, the director of Elden Ring, Hidetaka Miyazaki, said he has no idea why Elden Ring was so successful. Well, Mr. Miyazaki, let me tell you why Elden Ring was a hit. It is accessible. You don't have to be good at blocking like in the Dark Souls franchise, or good at parrying like in Bloodborne. There is no right way to play. You can play any way you like, no matter what your playstyle is. The number of weapons, spells, incantations, summons, and potions allow you to do it. And mods on PC push this even further. The game doesn't care if you take no damage during a boss fight, or hide in a corner and throw rocks at it until it dies, as long as you find a way to progress. The rules I set for myself at the beginning of this game, they were barriers I put there myself, and in fact, I'll admit now, actually, I made the game a little bit more difficult for myself by following those rules, because there are no rules in Elden Ring. Progressing any way you can is all that matters. The only people that seem to care how you play are the elitists on Reddit. Even down to the story, it's accessible. For the lore nerds, the story is super intricate and deep. There's a lot of connected quests and NPCs that lead to several different endings. But if that's not your thing, you can keep it simple. The game basically tells you, you need to kill 10 people to be the new Elden Lord. Now go and find them. And that's it. That's the story. In terms of navigation and difficulty, the ease of overall frustration by having spawn points everywhere on the map was a huge benefit, but more specifically, the stakes of Marika before boss rooms. So when you die, because it will happen, you can spawn right back in front of the boss room and go again, or choose to spawn somewhere else. Concentrating the difficulty that former fans love to boss fights, dungeons, and certain areas, while leaving the open world as a fun place to explore with no restrictions. Everyone's playthrough is truly unique because the way this game is designed, you can go anywhere and fight bosses in any order, and there are multiple routes to get to them. So everyone's path is not the same. The open world is full of unknowns and a lot of surprises, and those surprises are part of the enjoyment because this game has almost a Looney Tunes level of humor to it. Somebody in that studio was just laughing to themselves at their desk as they thought up of new ways to constantly fuck with players and pull the rug from under them. You learn how this game works by dying. I learned that enemies aren't confined to their rooms by thinking I was safe by just running outside of that room. I later learned that enemy size does not make a difference and you are actually never safe. But the award for the funniest thing in this game goes to those giant sentient steel balls that follow you. As insane as it sounds, Elden Ring is the most difficult and punishing game I've ever played, but it is fair. Not once did I feel cheated. I know that every time I died, it was my own fault, and I learned from it. People say the game needs an easy mode, but I disagree. There's so many tools available for you to succeed, you just need to find one that works. If you've ever looked at Elden Ring and was interested but said to yourself, I don't think I could play that because it looks hard, I'm urging you to just try it. You don't want to rob yourself of the experience and miss playing one of the best games of this decade. I didn't plan to do my first playthrough as a samurai, but now that I've completed it, I still plan to do my Lightning Wizard playthrough, which I think says a lot about this game. Because of my attention span, if any game tends to go over like 30-40 hours, I lose interest and I'm most likely to put the game down. I finished my first playthrough after 150 hours, and I honestly can't wait to do it all over again.